Hello and welcome to another Magic the Gathering draft video. This is how to draft MTG. Today we're talking about the balance changes in Alchemy Horizons Baldur's Gate draft. My thoughts on those changes, we're going to go over each card, talk about if I think it's going to be more or less powerful and how it's going to change the format going forward, and sort of how I'm going to approach the format having been changed in this way. As always, please do click like, leave a comment, and click the subscribe button if you like what we're doing here on this channel. It helps us in a huge way, and we really, really appreciate it very much. So just to start off, I'll just say a few quick words on the idea of rebalancing cards digitally. I think it's cool that they're trying this. This was one of the things that I thought would be really cool for Limited, is to see some of those cards that are just a little bit too powerful for Limited but are great for Constructed, maybe be changed to suit the Limited environment a little bit better. I know a lot of folks play Draft in order to collect cards for Constructed, so you don't want to just straight up remove them, but if they have different effects in Draft and then their normal effects in Constructed, at least in the online world, in Arena, I think that could be pretty cool. And the idea that, you could bring up a color that's not doing as well in Draft, or tone down, a crazy card like Inspiring Overseer from Streets of New Capenna, which was just head and shoulders better than any other card in the set nearly. All of that is stuff that I'm pretty interested in, so I'm excited to see how this plays out. All that being said, I am kind of an old school player, so part of it feels wrong to me. I'm sort of used to cards just staying the same. You learn the set once, you don't really want to learn it again. There's already way too much text on most of these cards to begin with, so it does sort of feel a little bit weird to me. And obviously this doesn't work very well in the paper realm, which is one of the most fun places to play Draft. But let's see how this goes. Their stated goals in the Wizards of the Coast article were to make blocking better, nerf the best aggressive commons, and make blue as a color overall better, as it is the worst color by a whole lot in this set. And I have frequently recommended to not draft it at all. So hopefully they can make it a little bit better, make the format a little bit more interesting, maybe freshen it up as we are several weeks into it at this point. My overall thoughts in general about how to approach this, if you are able to, I would try all the buffed cards and strategies as soon as possible. Don't be afraid to maybe sort of burn a couple of drafts saying, okay, well, this card has been changed. Let's see if it's good. This strategy they're clearly trying to push. Let's see if it's good. Oh, it's not good. Oh, that's too bad. I lost. I went 1-3 or whatever. We move on. We learn. We move on. If you don't have the capital to do that, then, watch some videos by great drafters who are trying these things out and find out that way. And then at least you sort of know going into the set when you draft if that's something you want to pursue or not. Secondly, I'd like to use this as a learning experience myself to sort of see the effects of different things in the design world. Like, this is an actual direct window into what happens if we change the mana cost of a card. What happens if we change the power and toughness of a card? We actually get to see that R&D process in real time. And I think that'll be very useful for card evaluations going forward, or if they continue to do these types of alchemy changes going forward, they shave a mana off of a certain type of creature or a certain type of spell, and we say, well, when they did that last time, that really had a big effect, or when they did that last time, it really didn't have a big effect at all. We can sort of use that to inform our choices going forward as we're playing these formats as they get changed. Let's go through the actual cards and the changes to them. First, we got Dragonborn Looter. It now costs a single blue mana from 1 and a blue. So cutting its mana cost in half is a significant change. I think it's pretty nice for blue to have a 1-drop creature that can tangle with some of the 2-drop creatures in the aggressive decks, namely Hobgoblin Captain, Flaming Fist, Dustguard, Soldiers of the Watch. A little less so, because trading for half of this card is not great, but trading 1 mana for their 2 is pretty good. And then, of course, the looting ability on Dragonborn Looter gives us some utility later in the game, and it sounds like, from what they're saying, they want blue to play a bit more of a defensive role, play a bit more of a controlling game, which means we want to make it to the late game by trading advantageously with the opponent's aggressive creatures, and then being able to pull ahead on resources later in the game. And this does both of those things, so I'm pretty excited to see this in a controlling deck. We'll see how well it does. Next is Pseudo Dragon Familiar. It is now a 2/2 from a 2/1, which to me doesn't really matter at all because I don't think you're ever blocking with this creature. It will dodge Shambling Ghast, which is pretty nice, but this particular change I don't think actually makes a difference at all in terms of what this card is trying to do. I think they could have pushed it to 3 toughness. If you look at a card like Pegasus Courser from sets past, though, this was like, one of the best commons in the sets that it was in. But as a 3 mana, 3 toughness flyer, give something else flying for free with the Pseudo Dragon Familiar. You have to pay mana to get that flying. So, 3 mana, 2/3 flyers, pretty push stats, and the activated ability. Maybe it's a little bit too good, but at 3 toughness, as a 2/3 in particular, it could profitably block stuff like Priest of Ancient Lore, Steadfast Paladin, which are cards, Soldiers of the Watch that we just mentioned. These are cards that are just super annoying to have to deal with on the blocking side because they provide value up front. They're cheap, they're aggressive, and they really easily push through a 3 mana 2/2 flyer that we're, not very interested in blocking with to begin with. Next is Water Weird. It now has the activated ability, pay 1 and a blue to give it +1/-1 until end of turn. So this is a card, when I initially saw it, I kind of liked it. I like the 4 mana 3/4 stat line. So it, blocks reasonably well on turn 4. The problem is that the text on it just really never mattered at all because it's pretty hard to get in with it. And when you do, getting a +1/+1 counter on it or whatever is not that big of a deal. It's not really gaining too much incremental advantage for you. And then if you are swinging in with it, you're not able to use it defensively, which is what a controlling deck needs to do. So I would have liked to have seen an added ability that, maybe actually makes it unblockable and maybe added, a point or 2 of toughness, i.e. Drownyard Amalgam from Innistrad Midnight Hunt, which wasn't even that great of a card in the set, but something that can really block super well, and then late in the game for sure can get in there and close things out, whereas like sometimes, Water Weird is just going to be up against like a Herd Gorger or something on the other side, and it's just never going to actually matter in the game. So, something that can help you stay alive early and then really swing the game around in your favor later on is more what I think I would have liked to have seen in this slot for blue. That being said, the card is strictly better, so it's worth trying out. Paying a pile of mana to make it bigger can definitely close out the game a little bit faster if your opponent doesn't have any good blockers, or if we're able to make this unblockable somehow. And, the ability to, pay 4 mana and give it 5 power and trade up for something, I really don't think that's going to matter that much. And, defensively, I'd be pretty wary of investing that much mana, when I'm blocking with something, because if our opponent just has, Patriarch's Humiliation or whatever, we're just getting absolutely destroyed. So, again, without harping too much, this card just kind of doesn't do either job all that well, being defensive or, closing out the game. So, yeah, that's why I would have liked to have seen an unblockable ability on it. Next is Young Blue Dragon. Blue's favorite common, best common, is now even better. It's now a 3/4 from a 3/3. This card was already quite good, so I would imagine that it's quite a bit better. It now just eats the 3/1 aggressive creatures and the 3/2s in the aggressive decks. So that's pretty good. Don't be afraid to just drop this on turn 5 if you're behind. Don't feel like you have to use the adventure side of it. And then, of course, this card can also just win the game for you by attacking for 3 in the air. So kind of doing the things that I wish the Water Weird had been able to do. All that being said, the Sand Augury, it's really nice, right? If it's turn 7 and you get to, scry 1, draw 1, play this, that's amazing. But on turn 2, you really want to be playing something that affects the board. So please don't feel like you have to cast this adventure on turn 2 or at all. It's really, really important in this format to just get on board, get this thing down as early as possible, neutralize a couple of their attackers and try to pull ahead in a different way. A couple of other notes is now this dodges Dragon's Fire, which is pretty nice, unless they've got an actual dragon to increase the damage of it. Just to my other point about the Sand Augury, the adventure, this is kind of close to something like Cloud Reader Sphinx, which was an excellent common back in Dominaria, which I would think is a similar power level to this set, because that set was from a few years ago. But 5 mana 3/4 flyer was a good stat line then. But the real beauty of Cloud Reader Sphinx was it comes down and scries you into more action right away, and that's really what the control decks need to sort of pull ahead in the late game. They need to get something on board that can block right away and accrue some value, accrue some resources, draw us into more gas when the aggro opponent is starting to maybe draw an extra land or two. If we can make sure that we're drawing another Cloud Reader Sphinx or whatever, then we can really get ahead. And that's where Young Blue Dragon just falls a little bit short in that category. But I'm not sure what other change you would make, because if you make the adventure a single blue mana, then this is just almost a strictly better opt in a lot of ways. And if you reduce the mana cost of the creature itself, you might not be able to make it a 3/4, and that's important for longevity of the creature. So all that being said, I think the card's excellent, and it's going to be more of a pull into blue. But these are just some of the factors that I would be thinking about if I were trying to build a deck that was going to survive the early game and pull ahead in the late game. Next is You Come to a River. It's now 3 mana, up from 2, and is now a sorcery instead of an instant. So these are 2 nerfs, actually. But the effect of the spell has changed from returning something to owner's hand to putting a non-land permanent on the top or bottom of opponent's library, up to them whether they want it on top or bottom. And then it still sneaks one of your creatures through if you want to. So I think this becoming a sorcery is actually just kind of made the card worse. I think 2 mana instant bounce something can really blow out a combat in a nice way. And then the combat trick side of it, +1/+0, can be used if you really need to trade up or whatever in combat, or of course, get a hit in, maybe finish your opponent off. Changing this to a sorcery sort of takes a lot of that power away, a lot of the element of surprise. And if we look at other cards that have had the top or bottom effect, such as Revenge of the Drowned, Run Out of Town, these are both pretty solid removal spells / combat tricks in their formats, mostly because they were instant speed. Shaving a mana off, these both cost 4, Come to a River costs 3. That's a big deal too. So this is another card we're just going to have to try and see if it's any good. It can be a huge blowout, and this is 3 mana. It's a 1/1, and it could, if you're putting like a 6-drop on top or something, you're really setting your opponent back. But we'll just have to see. I would have liked to have seen this at 4 mana as an instant, because we know how good that effect is. And then, the +1/+0 isn't great in combat or whatever, but it still gives it a little bit of added flexibility where you can swing in for that final point of damage. So we'll see with this one. Next is Kenku Artificer. It's a 1/3, up from 1/1. Still never putting this card in your deck, I don't think. It's good if you have a lot of treasures, but that also has been pretty hard to put together in this format. So unfortunately the theme is just not supported here. So whether or not it's a 1/1 or a 1/3, it just has 0 effect on the game. So I would still be looking to not draft this, not play it. Next is Val Eager Scholar. Is now a 2/2 or a 4/4 on its backside, up from 2/1 and 4/3. So this is a creature that really doesn't want to get into combat. We're never really wanting to attack with it because we want to activate it to get the looting effect. And then we never want to block with it because, like, even if they come in with, like a 1-power creature, and we block and they have a trick, then we don't want to lose Val. It's a pretty valuable card. It costs 3 mana. And we want to be able to activate it. So the stat boost on this, to me, doesn't really make sense because this is not a card that's trying to enter combat. It being a 4/4 when it flips over is pretty cool. At 5 mana, that's a lot to specialize. But then, having something that kind of pseudo costs 5 and is a 4/4 right away and can block, I think that's quite useful. But like if we look at something like Merfolk Looter, which is 2 mana for 1/1, it loots. I get that this is sort of quote unquote too powerful for limited. They stopped really printing cards like this. But like this is really what you want. So I think if they wanted to push it, Val that is, as an uncommon, they could have made it a 2 mana 1/1, specialize 5, flip into a 4/4, and I think that would have hit the theme a little bit better. I'm not really interested in paying an extra mana for an extra point of power and toughness on a card that I'm not trying to put into combat. That being said, again, this is strictly better, so I will say try it out, but I'm also giving my thoughts on what I think of the card. So there we go. Next is Allura Rogue Companion, is now a 3/3 on the front and a 4/4 on the back. Again, similar situation. Like, we never want to block with this thing because we're investing a lot of mana into it. It needs to stick around so that we can actually get value out of its ability. Playing a 3/3 for 4 mana on turn 4 and trying to block is a really, really bad recipe for disaster, especially if you're on the draw. So I'm not sure how I would have changed this differently. Obviously, it's strictly better. It's a little bit more resilient on blocks, but if you're attacking with it, it's probably unblockable anyways. So I might have shaved a mana off this, might have shaved a power. Like if this was a 3 mana 2/2, then you're getting the use of its effect right away. That's more powerful, I think, than having a little bit extra toughness in a card that we really don't care to block with. If you look at something like Cradle of Baldur's Gate, this is more up the alley of, I think, what you're looking for in a deck like the Saboteur style deck, where this is a 2 mana 1/3. So if it dies in combat, you're not super upset because it's probably trading for 2 mana worth of cards or more. So it's holding back a blocker early, and then later in the game it's getting your stuff in there. This is more what we want. Obviously it's 2 colors. It's it's certainly more powerful than Allura, but I think if they're trying to push this theme, I would look to do something more like this, or just make Allura cheaper in general, so that we can get online earlier and swing the tempo in our favor, because this format really is all about tempo and really all about being the aggressor, getting ahead. And finally, for blue, we've got Goggles of Night, which now equips for 1, down from 2, which is a big change. This card might actually be pretty sweet now. I really enjoy these types of effects. They're pretty miserable to play against when they get going. I think this card's pretty good. Like, if we look at Staggering Insight from Theros Beyond Death, which is a few sets ago. This is one of my favorite cards from that set, and it was quite powerful. 2 mana, only get the effect once. It doesn't stick around to re-equip, but you do get the power toughness boost and the lifelink, which was obviously huge as well. But I think these cards are close enough in power level that I'm interested in trying Goggles of Night. It's definitely not as strong as Staggering Insight, but I think it's certainly moved up a whole lot in terms of its power level. So I'd be interested in trying to draft a blue deck around Goggles of Night. Let's look at Guild Sworn Prowler next. Is now a 1/1 down from 2/1. This is a great change. This is one of the best commons in the set. And the 2 power really makes it excellent in all of the aggressive decks. Now it's a lot better when paired with blue cards, such as Goggles of Night that we were just talking about. It puts it sort of more into an archetype-based deck rather than just being great in any deck. And as the opponent to this card, if they attack with it, you're okay taking 1 damage, whereas taking 2 damage for a few turns was just a huge deal. And then you would eventually have to block it and give them the card. So really, really like this change. And hopefully this pushes blue-black into being an actual deck and takes away a little bit of the power of white-black aggro, black-red aggro, that kind of stuff. Manticore is now a 3/1 up from 2/1. They probably had room to even go a little further with this one if they wanted to, but definitely a good change. Card was completely unplayable. Now it's actually a real clock in the sky. Maybe it plays a little bit better with blue. Trying to buff blue by making surrounding colors play a little bit better with it is a pretty cool approach, and I totally dig that. I think they also could have made this 3 mana, and that probably would have been, almost assuredly would have been more powerful, and I'm sure they considered that and decided they didn't want to, but yeah. I don't know. It's not a card I'm super excited about, but I'll be willing to give it a shot, I guess, if I feel like I'm in a deck that's sort of playing to the late game, where this can actually close things out for us, but still not a high pick, I don't think. Next is Baleful Beholder, now a 7/5 up from 6/5. I'm not sure why black is getting buffs in this set, because it's already one of the 2 best colors in the format, being white and black. I was already playing Baleful Beholder on occasion anyways as a curve topper in an aggro deck, and I think it still fits that role just fine. I don't really like it in control, so if they're trying to make control better, if they're trying to make blue-black specifically better, I would have liked to have seen something maybe a little bit better statted. I've got Morkret Behemoth here. This is not like the perfect example, but a high toughness creature that has menace so that it can come down and block for you right away, and then again close out the game once you're stabilized. Give it a little piece of evasion, and make it difficult to deal with for the opponent. Something like that. I think if you're trying to push control, as it stands, I don't think this change really makes that big of a difference. You're still not going to be excited about picking and playing Baleful Beholder, but it is better. So feel free to give it a shot if you were on the fence before. 7 power is a 3-turn clock rather than a 4-turn clock of 6 power. So definitely try it. Another buff for black here. Eyes of the Beholder now costs 3 black, down from 4 black. So a significant change here. 5 mana is a lot less than 6. Anytime they shave a mana off something, expect it to really feel more powerful and more of an include in your deck. I think you can play 1 of these, 2 of these maybe, whereas before you were, hoping to never play this card. I think it still suffers from the fact that like the most powerful creatures in the format, or the most winningest creatures of the format as well, are like Blessed Hippogriff, Priest of Ancient Lore, Steadfast Unicorn, where you're trading down 1, 2, 3, 4 mana on these to interact with them. So a 5 mana removal spell just isn't very well positioned in a format that's about getting on board and sort of generating value from your creatures. It does deal with Dread Lenorm quite well, but if your opponent's already gotten value from the 4 mana instant side of it, it's just kind of a recipe for disaster to be sort of filling up your deck with 5 mana removal spells and hoping that you're going to be able to trade favorably with what your opponent's doing. So, play a couple of these. Probably just 1 actually at a maximum, but this is not free reign to just sort of jam a bunch of removal spells in a deck and try to play defense like you could 20 years ago in Magic Limited. Next is Sigil of Miracle. Now costs 1 and a black, down from 2 and a black. Still don't think that this card is playable. But again, this is something that I want to try out at some point in the format. Hopefully I'll get to. Because the effect is powerful once it's online, but again, this is a format where like skipping turn 2 or playing something that doesn't affect the board on turn 2 is how so many games are lost. So I would be very, very wary of trying to run this out early. But I mean, something like Dormant Grove was one of the better uncommons in its limited format, so the effect is super powerful. I would have liked to have seen this being easier to achieve, rather than having 4 creatures in your graveyard, maybe 3 or maybe even 2 if they really wanted to push it, and they could have increased the mana cost of this. At 4, it's a really hard achievement to unlock, so I'm not super optimistic about it, but they are seemingly trying to push green-black self-mill, so I think it's worth giving a try, as I said sort of beginning of the video. Next is Young Red Dragon. It's now a 3-1 from 3-2, and it can block. So it still can't really block because it just dies to anything. I mean, it can block as a 3 power, maybe it trades, but like you don't want to trade with their 3-1 because it cost them 2 mana. This costs you 4 mana. You don't ever want to play Bathe in Gold because you want to be playing a creature on turn 2. So I don't really see this card becoming any better than it was. I think it's actually exactly the same power level as it was to me anyways, which is to say it's not good at all. And now it's got the added disadvantage of dying to Pilgrim's Eye, which shows up in a lot of people's decks. So I would still stay away from Young Red Dragon if I were you. Next is Dragonborn Immolator, another card that was really bad and I think still is kind of bad. The ability now costs 2 and a red, up from 1 and a red, and it grants +2/+0, up from +1/+0. So that is a significant gain. But if we're looking at like a 4 mana 2/4, if we want it to attack as a 4/4, we got to invest 3 mana into it. Like that could be our whole turn. So this card again is just pretty awkward for me. I like that it comes down on turn 4 and can block for us, but it's not taking out anything with 3 power with any regularity as a blocker. So there'll be a lot of times where our opponents can attack into this almost free of charge, and we have to respect the combat trick and decide if we want to sort of go down that route. And then really hopefully not, but like if we're in a spot where we're trying to block with this and pump it to trade, then we're really, really in a bad situation. If they have, the Blessed Hippogriff or something that can deal with this in response, we're just really getting wrecked at that point. So still not a card I'm interested in playing. If we look at something like Falcon Wrath Celebrants, which I understand was one of the better commons in its format, but this is an uncommon. I think we can push the power of it a little bit. Something like Falcon Wrath Celebrants is a 4/4, costs 1 more mana, but whatever. Comes down, gives us 2 resources to sort of pull ahead in the late game. It's got evasion, and we don't have to invest any other mana into it after we cast it. This is the kind of card I want to see at the top of an aggressive curve or in a deck that is trying to block and go long. So I would have liked to have seen something a little bit more akin to this type of card rather than a card that isn't a great stat line to begin with, coming down late in the game on turn 4, and then asking more of us to actually sort of do what we want it to do. Next is Circle of the Land Druid, now a 2-1 up from a 1-1. This is a big change. So this is now a 2-mana card that can trade with all the 2-drops and... well, not all of them, but all the aggressive 2-drops and probably a bunch of the 3-drops as well. This is a great little speed bump for the green decks, and you get your land back when it dies. And this is actually hopefully going to be a really big piece of a self-mill strategy, along with Druidic Ritual, which now returns up to 2 creatures and or lands instead of 1 of each. So just a little bit of added flexibility on this card. It's not going to be a linchpin, but it's a card you could play 1 or 2 of if you're super in on the mill theme, and you could anyways. Like, this deck was already kind of viable, so now it's got a little push in power, and I like to see that. So between these 2 cards and the Sigil, we've certainly seen an attempt to make this strategy better, so I'm interested to try it out. I think Circle of the Land Druid, we'd be happy to play 3-4 of these just to sort of get the graveyard stacked early and actually have a reasonable way of blocking our opponent's creatures and staying alive. So I think this deck could be pretty sweet. Next is Emerald Dragon. It's going to gain Ward 2 and lose Trample. I still don't think you really care about this card. Dread Lenorm and Hill Giant Herdgorger are both better than this. The instant side of it, the adventure, is not really useful. The big problem with this is you spend 6 mana and it just dies to removal right away, and it didn't get you any value. And it's still kind of going to die to removal because all the best removal spells are pretty cheap, with the exception of Grim Bounty, but still that's 6 mana for 6 mana after you've paid the ward cost. So I don't really see this card getting that much better, but if you're in Dragons, sure, you can rock it. Split the Spoils is next. Costs 1 and a green down from 2 and a green, so they shaved a mana off this one. Yeah, again, just trying to push this self-mill strategy. Unfortunately, this card does not itself mill you, so it requires you to have a bunch of other pieces to really be viable, but I think you can certainly try to play 1 of these. The problem with this deck, though, is that a lot of these effects aren't playing to the board, and so we're doing all this cool stuff, but at the end of the day, like, we still don't have that many creatures out, and our opponent's beating us down, and what are we going to do about that? If we look at something like Gnawed of the Bone, this is from years and years ago, but anybody who remembers the graveyard deck from Innistrad from all that time ago, this was kind of an important piece of it, because if your opponent was beating you down, you'd just gain 10 life at some point and then flash it back. And this card was probably too powerful, but I think that this deck really does need something like this where you can incidentally mill something into your graveyard and actually gain some life back that you've lost and start to pull ahead, because otherwise I still think it's going to struggle against the super aggressive decks. But as I've said, I'm interested to try it. Next is Steadfast Unicorn. Now costs 4 and a white, up from 3 and a white to activate. Card's really good, so adding a mana here is going to make it slightly worse. I still think it's quite good. You're going to want to play these. Getting the game started on turn 1 is really important for the aggressive decks. And late in the game, the difference between 5 mana and 4 mana isn't a huge amount, but this will be harder to activate twice in 1 turn, which certainly was a big problem. But it's still a card you're going to want to deal with as the opponent, so I still think it's good. We'll see how big of a change this makes. I don't think it'll make that big of a change. Similarly, Blessed Hippogriff, the adventure side, now costs 1 and a white, up from just a single white mana. That's a big tax. You're doubling the cost of the adventure side, but still big value if you can get a favorable trade with the adventure side and then get to play the Griff. And the Griff is also good on its own. Like, even if you don't get to play the adventure side of it, 4 mana 2/3 that jumps another creature is still quite good. So I think this is still going to be a top common in the set. I'm glad to see it nerfed a little bit, though, because this was just infuriating to play against. And it also makes it a little bit easier as the opposing player to play around different things, because if they're holding up a single white mana, now it's Patriarch's Humiliation, whereas before you wouldn't be sure if it was the Hippogriff or the Humiliation. So at least you know what they have now. And if they're holding up 2, it's a little bit more of a telegraph that they have this. So it makes it easier to play around. It's really, really hard to play around 1 mana tricks like this, and it giving so much value is just really, really rough. So still think it's great, but definitely like to see the nerf. All of the dragon orbs now add 1 mana of any color as opposed to their own color only. So yeah, a little bit of a buff here. Wasn't a big fan of these to begin with. The green one I still think is the best of them since it provides a +1/+1 counter. But yeah, this definitely pushes the Dragons deck a little bit, which is cool because it wasn't very good. Just having access to more fixing is definitely great for that deck. So I still don't think you want to play more than 2 total of these types of effects, but the fact that you'll be able to see them more often and that, you know, these ones actually help you fix, now they're all just a little bit better. The red one being the second best, I think, out of the 3. I would try to play the Dragons deck a little bit more if you've been trying to get into it. I think it's going to be slightly easier to pull off now that these orbs help with fixing. Also, they've buffed Lantern of Revealing, but like not really. The activated ability didn't come up too much, but now it costs 1 less mana, so I guess you can do that if you want to. You really want to play the Dragon Orbs over this, though. It's still not super desirable, but if you end up in that deck and you don't have any fixing, this is certainly a reasonable, you know, place to turn to. But again, you don't want too many of these effects because they don't affect the board, they don't block, they don't get you back in the game. So again, that Underseller Myconid is really the key linchpin for the Dragons deck and any green ramp deck. And finally, we got Navigation Orb. Has also been buffed. Its activated ability now costs 1 instead of 2. I like this change. I mean, 4 mana total to get 2 basic lands, 1 into play, and you can find Gate if you have one of those too. It's a good little fixing tool for the 3-color decks. It's a lot, though, to ask to take turn 3 off or to take turn 4 off to make this happen. Possibly could have been a little bit better if this was 2 mana and 2 mana, then it would be a little bit easier to weave in to, you know, your other plays and whatnot. But I mean, this is pretty close to Cultivate, and as a colorless card, that, you know, that is quite powerful. So I would expect to see a little bit more of Navigation Orb, and you can rely on it a little bit more to help your fixing. But again, this format is just so fast that I'm not really super confident that you know, multicolor decks and all this kind of stuff is really that viable. But again, we'll see how this change affects the format going forward. That's going to do it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. Please click like, leave a comment, click subscribe if you enjoy what we're doing here. Let me know what you think of these changes. Do you like that they're changing things at all? Are you excited to see how the format shifts, or are you just kind of over it by now? Yeah, let me know what you think. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks again for watching. We'll talk to you very soon. Bye for now.